Welcome to Golden Reflections, the podcast that takes you on a captivating journey through time as we celebrate the remarkable 50-year history of Northeast Ohio Medical University. I'm your host, Lindsay Loftus, and I'm thrilled to guide you through a series of heartfelt and nostalgic conversations with people who played a pivotal role in NEOMED's story. Joining me on today's episode is Dr. James Boex, who came to NEOUCOM in 1976. During his 30 years at the university, Jim served as the Student Affairs Dean, Special Assistant to the President, and Associate Professor of Community Health Sciences. Currently, Jim is an Emeritus Professor of Medical Education at the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Bill Keck, Professor and Chair Emeritus of the Department of Family and Community Medicine, served NEOMED from 1976 until 2008. Currently, Bill serves as chair of the Council on Linkages between Public Health Academia and Practice and is the Executive Director of Medical Education Cooperation with Cuba. Dr. Mark Savickas, Professor and Chair Emeritus, Department of Behavioral Sciences, served NEOMED from 1976 until 2016. Mark continues to teach part-time at NEOMED and Kent State University and conducts research on his theory of careers. And finally, Dr. Philip Westerman, Professor Emeritus of Biochemistry and Molecular Pathology, who served NEOMED from 1976 until 2009. Phil is currently happily retired and gainfully employed in many activities. Enjoy this episode as we explore the early years during NEOUCOM's founding. Discuss the significance of revisiting our story 5 decades later. What does NEOMED mean to you?
I'll start. A German philosopher says the future needs a past. And so a retrospective look of where we've been will inform where we're going. It also is a great opportunity for the leadership of the university and college to examine the organizational culture. I saw on the internet people are working on revising the mission statement, but that's what's being done, not how it's being done. The culture is the beliefs and the attitudes and the way employees work. So I think it's a grand opportunity for the leadership to explicitly restate what they see as the culture that they want us to be working and living in.
Mm-hmm. For my part, I'd say I certainly agree with Mark's initial statements, but would add that the college was formed for a reason, and it might be of value to people working at the university today to be able to look back with us and have some sense of why the college is here in the first place and what it purported to do, what its goals were, as a reminder, because over time those things tend to slip, and college could very well be moving from its somewhat unique position, I think, when it started, to be much more like a traditional medical school.
If I could jump in for a minute, I'd like to add on the fact that it may not be obvious to the people in the present, but in the early days of the school, it was a very iffy proposition. All of us who you're talking to today were recruited to a school that at that time that was still very much, as they say, a cornfield, let alone an operating accredited school. If legislators and hospital administrators and university administrators in what were then and still are competing institutions hadn't found common ground, none of us would be having this discussion today. It was about cooperation rather than competition in a time of need, responding to the common need that Bill was referring to.
What were some of those early challenges, Jim?
The first day I walked into my office, there was less than a year before the students were enrolled and to start their curriculum. I walked into that office, and Mark, it was the one next to Glenn's up on the second floor in Martinell. I walked in on that first day. there was an empty desk, 2 empty bookshelves, a chair,
Mhm.
and an empty wastebasket. And from this, we had to create how to admit these students, how to get them financial aid, how to get them places to live. How do we set up some kind of rudimentary advising or counsel? All the things that you do when you're dealing with young people, and these were very young people. So I can remember walking into that office and just being overwhelmed. And of course, that again is not obvious when you look at what NEOMED is today. And it took tremendous amount of hard work, tremendous amount of, again, cooperation and goodwill from a lot of other people, so that when students arrived on that first day of freshman orientation in September of '77, although the varnish, as you've heard me say before, on the seats in the lecture hall was not quite dry, it wasn't. We did have, thanks to Phil and Mark and Bill and others, a curriculum in place that they could start learning from.
Now, another challenge, Lindsay, was recruiting students to a school that was not accredited.
Mhm.
They had to come on faith, and we didn't get accredited till we graduated our first class, and recruiting a faculty to give up tenure where they were, to come with no tenure to NEOUCOM. So just recruiting people to come was an issue.
Yeah.
I didn't have a tenure anywhere else, but I did have an attractive offer from an industrial firm. And so I had to choose between that and a medical school, which consisted of one steel girder sticking out of Dr. and Mr. Jones's farm. So it was faith on my part, but I agree the students showed a lot of faith as well. And I think the institution showed faith in hiring me as well.
Mhm.
Of course, Dr. Old said I would be going back to Australia in 5 years.
Well, when I came, I at least had the fallback of a real job in Akron. Was the health director there. But I had the honor actually of producing the first curriculum for NEOUCOM, because I was asked to put together a course for students who were between C1 and C2, remember, their first and second college years. So that was the birth of the summer practicum, which was first taught during the summer of 1976. And I do remember too that the syllabus was very thick. We chose 6 or 7 community health problems that we wanted to expose these students to, and I filled each section with references related to the particular problem. And one of them was health maintenance. And I remember Bob Liebelt telling me that he was so proud he took this big syllabus into his board meeting one day to say, we have a curriculum, we have the first course. And one of the older physicians who was on the board at the time looked at it and said, health maintenance organizations, we're not going to teach that. And there was a bit of an explosion in there until Bob said, I grabbed it and started leafing through. He said, no, it's not HMOs, it's health maintenance, it's prevention. He said, oh, well, that's okay then.
Yeah.
So for the listener, the students at Kent State, Akron, and Youngstown State University were classified as C1 and C2. So they're college first year, college second year.
So
Can you talk about that transition to NEOMED, then NEOUCOM, as M1, M2? And when did we start to recruit for clinical faculty? Because for those first couple of years, they were on the respective campuses and then came to, I've heard stories about being in trailers on the respective campuses.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Talk about those early days and what happened.
I can say this about it. There was a small cadre, and I think I'll ask my compatriots on this call to remember ARP1 meetings or different committee meetings that we had. There was a small cadre of clinicians who were involved in the school by the time I got there. People like Bill Bunn, the hospital DMEs like J.C. Johns and Len Kakamo in Youngstown. So there were clinicians who'd been involved with the school since after the Medco report was approved. And they then were they would recruit their clinical colleagues to see if they wanted to participate in departments that stretched across the 3 community campuses. And many of these people had never met each other. I mean, they might have met each other at meetings or things that didn't really know each other until the school brought them together to work again towards this common goal. You'd be better off, I think, talking to somebody like Jay Williamson, if he's available, maybe to get some kind of information about that.
Jay is coming up later in the podcast.
Good.
Mhm.
As far as the interaction with the universities, I do remember Bill Rogers from University of Akron, and he was very involved in the whole process. And
Mhm.
you remember him, Bill, do you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I certainly
Sure.
do. Work closely with him.
And he really smoothed the wheels, I think, regarding the Akron students.
Yeah. Well, that was the trick, wasn't it? It was to find champions for this. In each of the academic and clinical settings. After all, many of the hospitals had residency programs that they were pretty sure they would lose eventually if they weren't connected soon to a college of medicine somewhere. So there was, I think, a lot of interest, a lot of desire to make things work, which is how collaborations tend to succeed, rather than finding ways to botch it up. But yeah, we had some really strong champions at each of the universities and in
hospitals.
the regions, hospitals. Mhm.
Yeah, the universities were very proud of the fact that they were getting a medical school program. And I remember talking to colleagues at Kent State, and they would say I was involved in this or that committee, that was working on the medical school, and they used to brag about it.
Yeah.
So it was good for universities to have this institute.
I want to underscore what you just said, Bill. One of the driving forces that resulted in NEOUCOM was that the hospitals were having trouble recruiting to their residencies.
Mhm.
And one of the goals for them was to create a larger pool of residents, which of course worked very well.
Mhm. Yeah.
Can you reflect on some of the university's shining moments and the impact that the universities had on health professions education?
Well, I think a shining moment we might all agree on is the graduation of the charter class and the full accreditation that resulted from that.
Yeah.
That was, if you will, the prize we had our eyes on for those early years, because if we didn't succeed in that, we could all go home.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I remember when the students took the shelf copy, part 1 of the basic sciences, and we actually scored in a few programs above the national average. And that was a surprise to a lot of people. And I think that was one of the arguments used when there was the threat of closing the institution in 1981. That here we're a new institution, and yet we were achieving good results in the shelf copy of the national boards. Do you remember that,
Yes,
colleagues?
yes. It was very important to us to have good board scores, because we were an unknown quantity to residencies across the nation. So you could be number 1 in your class, but what did that mean to people who never heard of NEOUCOM? But they could see our very, very good board scores, and it gave us credibility, and it helped our students get residencies. I think another shining moment is that the BSMD program, the 6-year program, worked exceptionally well.
Mhm.
Can you elaborate on that, Mark?
Well, I don't remember how many schools in the nation had BSMD programs. Dr. Olson used to tell us that most medical schools were formed on the German model of 4 years and 4 years. And then only under 20 in the United States were formed on the British model, which was the 2 and the 4 that we adopted. And the idea behind the British model was to produce more primary care physicians and more family physicians. So the success of our graduates shows that model could work.
Especially since, Mark, just to chime in, there really was only at the time one other
Only one?
UMKC, and they were having all kinds of accreditation difficulties and things like that. So we had a sort of a barrier to overcome in terms of credibility.
Mhm. And we had excellent leaders, fortunately. Stan Olson and Bob Liebelt really helped pull us all together very well. And for me, the early shining moment was the school's focus on community health. And actually, within a number of years after forming a division of community health sciences, equal administratively, at least, with basic sciences and clinical sciences. Instead of departments in that division, we had offices, but it was a real statement the school made that it was serious in terms of wishing to deal with and involve itself with the community and the variety of community agencies and institutions that generally are not linked to medical schools.
What are your most cherished memories of being at the university? All of you.
Well, I'll just keep going in that vein. I think the thing that really stands out to me is when we were able to develop this consortium Master of Public Health program. From my perspective, that was important. It built on the collaborative linkages that were part of the original NEOUCOM model. That is, it involved our companion universities and the medical school. Eventually, it included other universities, but at the beginning, it was just the three. An interesting sort of side story to that was that the board of the medical school, of course, somewhat dominated by the presidents of the three universities, didn't want the medical school to be able to have students assigned to the program. So they wanted themselves to be the home base for the students. So the degrees that were eventually granted were granted by a particular university, although it had the names of every other institution on it. And it was only later that the College of Medicine was able then to enroll its own students and give its own public health degree.
I spoke with Dr. Blacklow this morning, and he sends his regards to you, Dr. Keck, because I told him we were talking today, and he told a story about going to Dr. Cartwright to lobby for the MPH program because Kent State wanted that program.
Yes, she was a major barrier. Actually, at the board meeting, he invited me to come to the board meeting when the board was reviewing this and supposed to give final approval. We thought everything was settled, and we sat down, and it was Dr. Cartwright, I think, who looked at the agreement and said, no, she couldn't support it. Just shocked us. So everyone then dived into the agreement, and we found a place where we said, well, if we put a period here and capitalize the next word, would that work? And she looked at it and said, well, yeah, that would be all right. So it sort of saved it, and the MPH program began. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, he went out, Dr. Blacklow did really go out on a limb with his board to try to convince them that this made sense.
So for the rest of you, your cherished memory of the university or notable moments or milestones that you want to reflect on?
I have two that are very small, but emblematic of a larger thing. My first one is that behavioral science course was on Wednesdays from 8 to 11. And from 11 to 12, Dr. Liebelt came in and met with the students and had a dean's hour and discussed everything that was on their mind. And what I remember most clearly, at the very first dean's meeting, he went to the chalkboard and he put his home telephone number on the board. and said that if you need me day or night, call. That's emblematic of the attitude, not only of the leadership, but of the faculty toward the students. My second cherished memory is when Dr. Sarconi, a member of the charter class, was invited and gave the graduation speech as the honored guest. That was a very special thing. Phil, what about you?
I have a number. They're rather small. I was at the bottom rung of the academic ladder at that stage. And I was not a biochemist, and I had to learn to teach biochemistry. I was hired primarily to do research. And it turned out that second year of my teaching, I was awarded the M1 Teacher of the Year. And that was very gratifying. Other time was to be invited to be the commencement speaker in 2005. And I think I was the first basic scientist to be given that honor. And so that was a highlight moment. And the other one was that I had a background in organic chemistry and nuclear magnetic resonance, which is the forerunner of MRI. And here I was admitted into the hematology oncology subcouncil, teaching the students on the magnificent red blood cell and the mechanism of clotting. And so I had come a long way from quantum mechanics to this. So to be accepted by the clinicians, really, to participate in their Principles of Medicine course was a highlight moment. And the other one, which is a little humorous, a highlight moment was seeing my colleague Alan Steggles lecturing with flip-flops on and being reprimanded by Stanley Olson, really, for that. Didn't really quite come up to the professional standards that he expected. So there's several of my rather small highlight moments.
But say more about the flip-flops, Phil, because that was an improvement.
It was a step up. Yeah.
Well, I think he was barefoot a couple of times.
He was barefoot, and Lebo told him if he wanted to have a job, he better get shoes. And the next day he came in with flip-flops.
Oh, is that right?
And Frank would come into my office complaining that the students weren't paying attention during his lectures and are eating, and all I had to do was go, Alan Steggles? Well, briefly, probably my most cherished memory is one that some of you might not relate to or know about, and that is that in late June of 1983, I got a call from Harry Michel, who is president of the Senate, informing me that the school would henceforth receive about $3 million extra every year because we succeeded in getting past something called the clinical teaching subsidy. The school had been under tremendous fiscal threat prior to that, and that was just that was a golden moment.
I wanted to make a comment about your first question regarding the history of the school and why that's important. In preparation to this this presentation, I started reading this book that Margaret Dietz had prepared, and it's quite marvelous. And it's 25 years since she prepared this. It's called Silver Reflections. Obviously, the title of the next one is Golden Reflections. And it's got an enormous amount of data in there. It's just unbelievable. It jogged my memory a lot, really, to see that.
Each of you are in that book.
But in the modern time, this podcast is the replacement for a book.
Pretty much. Yeah. Dr. Westerman, I agree with you. And we are dedicating this podcast to Margaret. I used to meet with her every 4 or 5 weeks and ask her to tell me stories that were not in the book. And she would sit and tell me all kinds of stories, but I've been forward and backward in that book. And without that record, it would be hard for a lot of us to remember what happened as it was unfolding back from 1973 till now.
No, Margaret's written inside the cover of my book. It says, there is another book to write out there, Phil. Best wishes to you both.
Mhm.
Of course, I often, like you, Lindsay, I talk to her quite a bit about the true story. I mean, this is the facts, but all of the personal tragedies and dramas that it consisted in the early history of the medical school, and are probably not worth writing down. But
Jim,
I think a lot of the evolution of the school can be told in terms of its graduates. You know, I'm thinking back again to the early classes, Diane Batante and her husband, Michael. I mean, what tremendous impact they've had in the Youngstown community. And of course, the Batante family, as it turns out, on the school. Tommy and Lisa, I mean, Tom Boniface and Lisa Young, leaders in the school in so many ways. And people like Crystal Makel, who I mentioned before, Rajiv Venkaya. These are all people who become national leaders in their areas in many ways. I think that if you look at even my personal, I'm going to share my secret NEOUCOM hero is a woman named Barb Guarnieri. And I don't know if you guys remember Barbara. She was a direct entry. She came in the early, like maybe 83 or 84. She graduated. She was a nurse. She'd been working at City Hospital. I remember interviewing her and her saying, I want to be a family doctor. I want to do primary care in Portage County where I was brought up. She said that she was a terrific student. She graduated AOA, did her family practice residency at Summa Hospital, what is now Summa, and came back to Portage County and opened up a practice. She's the hero, the secret hero of NEOUCOM, not the big names like Rajiv or Amy Acton or something like that. And there's, of course, hundreds. I don't know how many graduates there are these days, but so many young people who are now out. Some of them actually are retiring from practice at this point. And that the crisis that brought these competing hospitals and universities together of not being able to recruit physicians for the people in this part of the state, it's been fully addressed by the school, which is, of course, a key factor in its continuing evolution.
Mhm.
Jim, I don't remember the name, maybe you do, of the one student who shocked us all at graduation when she walked across the stage to get her diploma, trailed by her 5 kids.
Oh, I remember that student, but no, I don't remember. I remember seeing it, Mark, but I don't remember
Isn't
her
that
name.
amazing what she did?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In
Lynn,
fact,
but-
I think a friend of mine has her as her physician, because we've talked about this a little bit. Yes, it was, you know, again, I talk about, I was lucky enough to work with these people. And again, the whole range, people coming, needing money, needing counseling. There was one young woman who I'll never forget. This was when I had an office big enough to have a sofa in it. So it must have been middle range of my career there. We made a deal that she would come into my office. She was depressed and they were changing her meds on her all the time. And our deal was she could come into my office at lunchtime. I would close the door. She would lie on my sofa and cry. And she did that all of her freshman year. Every, you know, and I just go on working. I mean, that was, she didn't want counseling. She just wanted a place where she could do that.
She
And
wanted to be safe. She wanted to be safe.
She wanted to be safe. And so this was a safe place that we could give her. And, you know, Mark, that woman never got a less than satisfactory grade, ever. You know, it just, again, I feel so lucky to have been involved in all of the kinds of things. Some of them are a little more humorous, you know, the Korean girl who wants to date the Muslim guy, or, you know, no, there was a ton of that. I mean, you know, it was a real privilege. And I missed that when I got my doctorate and went into teaching, because it was just a different kind of relationship.
Yeah.
we have a number of alumni that they met here and got married, and we call them neo-weds. And we just did a mailing to all of the neo-weds to celebrate Valentine's Day. So, Jim, to your point, I think their world got really small when they were very intensely studying to get a medicine degree. That was their social network, and it was pretty limited that because they just had limited amount of time because it was full court press, a
Mhm.
6-year program. They were running and gunning pretty hard.
Yeah.
Especially if, and again, my colleagues will remember this. For the first couple of years, the curriculum was 5.5 days. It was all day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday till noon. And in that day and a half that they weren't in school, they were expected to do all the things that we all like to do when we're not at work or something like that. It was an incredibly intensive curriculum.
And
then
and faculty meetings were 5 o'clock on Friday because Dr. Olson didn't want to interfere with the workday.
Yeah.
Does anybody know how many graduates we have?
We have 5,500 graduates, and that includes our pharmacy and graduate college alumni.
Mm,
The majority are medicine, obviously, but that's where we are.
mm.
So by university standards, we're probably a little smaller than a lot of places, but we're also still young in terms of 1981 being the first grad class.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the charter class composite. Dave has it hanging on his wall. I think there were 46 students.
Mhm.
That's about right.
Yep.
Yeah. And many of them are rock stars. As you mentioned, Jim. So
And
we
some
are,
were neo-weds too.
yes, some of them are.
Our new-
And we're blessed with some superstars that practice in not just Ohio, but nationally, that are NEOUCOM / NEOMed alumni.
Yeah, including several astronauts, as I remember.
There's at least one, that would be Phil.
Uh-huh,
Phil
Phil
Stepaniak.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we have one admiral, Scott Deichmann, was a direct entry. Spent a lot of time wondering what his career would be. It eventually went to a preventive medicine one, ended up at the CDC and advanced there in the public health service and became an admiral several years before he retired. And that's when I really began feeling older, knowing that students I'd mentored were retiring. Wow, been around a long time.
Well, here I am doing admissions. The student comes up, I think he was from Youngstown, with a name that was familiar. And I said, "Oh, hello, it's nice to meet you. Say, do you maybe have a cousin who's gone to the school? I recognize your name." And he goes, "Oh, no, sir, that was my father. And he said to say hello."
Yes.
Well, when I spoke at commencement in 2005, in the graduating class that year was the son of one of the students I'd taught in the charter class or the second class. I can't remember, but I think we remember that. So that's not a good feeling.
But I'll give you a variety of that is a good feeling. I was down at UC a couple of weeks ago, and they have, as they often do, a set of posters up of their award-winning teaching faculty. They call it the Golden Apple, like a lot of places do. And at the University of Cincinnati Medical School, the winner of the Golden Apple for freshman year teaching was Reed Hartman, who graduated from NEOUCOM about the year 2000 or thereabouts. It's nice to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is nice to see the legacy, and it's something to be very proud of. Each of you should be very proud of what you contributed to the university and its success. Are there any distinctive traditions or events or experiences that made your connection with NEOUCOM special?
There was two that I liked, and I don't know when they stopped. I imagine they stopped. The first one was Parents' Day. In the spring of M1, the parents would come, and it was such a pleasure to meet the parents because you could see where their kids came from. And it was also a real joy when grandparents came, and they were so proud to visit the school and see their child. The Another tradition that I loved was the student talent show. We saw incredible range from poetry, singing, dancing, music. I mean, unbelievable talents. And I always regretted that it seemed to be late in the year, like April, that you really got to see another side of all the students. And I also like the poetry contest, which I hope is still going on. So those were traditions when I was there.
I remember one talent show where one student did an imitation of Frank Hutterer.
Oh, I remember that was wonderful.
Lecture, because Frank had a tendency to stand the overhead projector. He tended to stand in front of the projection, and so you see his silhouette on the screen. Mark did a marvelous job of that, both in terms of imitating that idiosyncrasy, but as well as getting the Hungarian accent right. So
I want to add to that story, Phil. I was sitting next to Dr. Hutterer's wife, and she turned to me and said, "Why is that young man imitating?" And he said, "A doctor I never heard of. It was Frank's mentor."
oh,
Yes, I think I got roasted during one of those too. It was 1983. There was a water crisis in Akron. We had a contaminated water supply, and it went on for 5 or 6 weeks as we tried to figure out where it was coming from. And I was on the news a lot. I was the one who was telling people where it was safe to drink water and where it wasn't. And they did a little skit where somebody impersonated me and had me in front of a microphone telling everybody it was safe to drink the water, and I was going to prove it. And they drank a glass of water or part of it, and began to talk and began to sweat and shiver, look aside. And essentially, by the end of it, they were sick and lying on the floor. So, yeah, those were fun.
yeah.
And I think, you had, if you were on the faculty or the administration, you had to have a pretty thick skin, because we encourage the students to express themselves that way. And I think events, and Mark, to your point, I think events like Parents' Day, like May Day, the pig roasts, things like that, they all encouraged a sense of community, I think, that was really, I'd get up on that water dunking machine. Oh, the kids would line up, it was just, it did have a, as you said earlier, Mark, it had a culture.
I don't know, the picnics on the quad in the summer,
Yeah.
spring and summer. Yeah.
Well, it was wonderful to come to an institution where you were presented with the challenge of creating the rules, of writing the curriculum, working out the bylaws, establishing procedures. That was not the experience of a lot of my colleagues, because they go to an institution that's established, and it's quite different. And at the same time, it makes it very difficult and rather stressful. But the challenge, I think, is very rewarding if it succeeds. And I think in our case it did.
Was there a concerted effort to do things like that, to build community, that you all would get together outside of the classroom and just as faculty and administrators, because of the way NEOUCOM was formed and the way students matriculated from the 3 state schools to NEOUCOM?
I can tell you that Bob Liebel explicitly told me that we needed to do that. A lot of the BSMDers had never lived away from home before. We were, I will say this, it appeared to me that we were sometimes 2 to 3 weeks ahead of the students in terms of curriculum development.
If we were lucky.
If we were lucky.
Right.
So, and the students knew that we were, not, I don't want to say we were making it up as we went along, that the students knew that we were building the airplane while we were trying to fly it. So there was a sense of community, and again, and we tried to build events, we tried to build a culture that that allowed for students, especially the early classes, the 81s, 82s, maybe the 83s, to be a part of what was going on in a very significant way.
Lindsay, going back right to the beginning of organizational culture, the root metaphor of the NeoMed culture was family. We are a family, and new people were greeted, welcome to the family.
Is there anything you want to tell us that we've not asked or covered? Any memory that you want to share?
I will very briefly mention something that Bob Liebelt said to me the day I interviewed for the job in 1976. He said to me, "I have great respect for the interstate highway system in Ohio." And that kind of took me aback. I said, why is he telling me this? Well, again, and I think the others on the call will understand this. What he was telling me was that I was going to be spending a lot of time in my car on my way to Canton, on my way to Youngstown, on my way to Akron, sometimes in one day. There was no cell phone. There was no internet. If you wanted to engage meaningfully with somebody, the best way to do it was in person. And I know a lot of us in our different pursuits learned a great deal about the interstate highway system in Northeastern Ohio. And everywhere we went, I'll personalize it. Everywhere I went, I said, I'm here to talk to you about your medical school. And this takes, I think it's an extension of Mark's comment about family. Trying to embrace this idea that NEOUCOM wasn't Rootstown. I mean, that was definitely something that the message we were trying to put out, that Bill Rogers at Akron U was representing his medical school. Tom Terrell, the DME down at Altman, was representing their medical school. That Tony Sabota at Youngstown and Ben Yazwiak and those people, we were all in it together for their medical school. And I think that that concept of regionalism, the 17 counties, I would say that the whole time I was at NEOUCOM, that was a driving theme. And it was a very powerful theme, because on any given day, I could have to be getting in my car and going somewhere to do something.
Yes, when we recruited faculty, we would make the case that when all the other qualifications they had, they needed to have a driver's license.
Well, that's literally the case. You had to ask that question. Do you have a valid driver's license?
That's right. And the car.
Jim, did the initial classes, didn't they get like $50 a piece to pay for gasoline because of the places they had to go? I have a vague memory of that.
You know, now that you remind me, there was a stipend paid, a small stipend. It wasn't much. Yes, because especially I think in their sophomore year, they had to do a fair amount of driving around.
Yeah, we had a primary care preceptorship where students were linked up with a family doc or an internist or a pediatrician, and they got a stipend to cover travel costs.
Lindsay, what I want to say, the most important thing to me is that Jim used the word a region, the 17 county region. I wonder how many of our graduates would never have gone to medical school anywhere if it wasn't for NEOUCOM. I think NEOUCOM created a space and a place for so many of working class and lower middle class students to actually imagine themselves attending a medical school and having the dream fulfilled because NEOUCOM was there.
Yeah, well said, Mark.
Yeah.
What's the one thing about the university today that you would never have predicted?
That it would be called a university.
Yeah, it depends on when in the course of our experience you're asking, would we have been making predictions?
Yeah.
Certainly at the beginning.
Yeah.
I agree with Phil. There's no way we would have, or at least I would have thought about this moving on to university. We were just scrambling to get a medical school that was relevant to the community in which it was operating.
There was a time, Lindsay, when I had a real concern, I don't know if others, that NEOUCOMs would move to downtown Akron, and that the physical plant in Rootstown would become a community college. And instead of that, it became a university.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that because, as others have alluded to, there was a time when the regents wanted to close NEOUCOM, and NEOUCOM was in a budgetary crisis.
Yeah, it was 1981, Jim.
Yeah, if we were trying to forecast at that time, I'm not sure I would have forecast that we could be in a position to have this discussion at this point. But the school, because of the kind of leadership it's had, and Mark did a nice job of, I think, encapsulating how the different leaders reacted to the different stimuli, or the different needs and things like that. The school is in a position to become a university by building up its graduate offerings and the pharmacy school. I think one of the things that we had at Rootstown in the early days was a sense of mission.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
And when I went to Cincinnati, that is one of the oldest medical schools in the country. It's a very large traditional academic health center. There is no sense of mission there. And I would not want to see NeoMed move in that direction of just sort of, oh, we'll be good at everything. I would miss, as a person, as an individual, I would miss that sense of mission.
Yeah, the first 5 years were a real challenge.
Everybody worked long hours, everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was exciting. You know, it was. We all did it willingly, I think, because we wanted this to succeed, and our reputations were riding on it, of course. But yeah, those were interesting times, kind of fun times in a way, reflecting back on it. At the moment, I wasn't always having fun, but
No,
reflecting back on it.
I never went to so many free lunches.
Yeah,
There were so many interviews, and they had to rustle up an audience to listen to a talk that probably they had no interest in.
You know, I've told Lindsay I was a very junior member of the administration, probably the most junior member, but they dragged me to every meeting because they needed bodies. You know, they just wanted to sort of fill the room. So I got to go to all this stuff and learn all these fascinating and interesting things just because they needed another butt in a seat.
Mm-hmm.
For my job interview, I had Dr. Olson and Dr. Liebel present, and I don't know how much they understood of it. But you know, in Martinell, that we had to do that. We had to walk the hallways and drag people down to listen to.
I learned a lot about how NEOUCOM worked in those days. I came for an interview in the fall, maybe September of '76, and I was interviewed by Bob Liebel. And at the end, it seemed to go okay. And at the end of the interview, he said, you know, we'll get back to you. We've got other candidates we have to talk to. And I said, all right, sure, I understand that. And then he popped out and popped back in and said, can you stay an extra 15 or 20 minutes? And I said, sure. And about 5 minutes later, he took me into Stan Olson's office. And Stan interviewed me for about 5 minutes, and I went out. And then Bob came out and said, we'd like to offer you the job. And I learned who made the decisions through that interview.
Yes. Yeah. Well, in my case, I found out that Stanley Olson had been assigned to Sydney during the World War II. So when I interviewed, I had a really nice conversation with him because he liked Australians and he liked his experience in Sydney. So, I wasn't offered the job right away, though.
Yeah. Well, we probably all were interviewed by both, weren't we? Were you, Mark, as well? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
My stories, they had identified Glenn and me and a man I later met, Zimney from Washington University in St. Louis. And the third one was a man from University of Pittsburgh Medical School who was a huge researcher, had tons of money and marijuana. And he had 19 people working for him. And Liebel later told me they didn't want to hire him because they didn't want to be known as the marijuana school.
Well, yeah, and my circumstance was a little unusual. I didn't have any competition in a sense,
Right.
because
Right.
Liebeld and Olson had gotten together with the board in Akron and decided they were going to jointly recruit, see if they could find somebody who could work in both places, agreeing that each one could go off on their own if they figured that was best for them. So I had to be interviewed in Akron and at NEOUCOM. And when they told me they wanted me to come, I essentially got the same sort of direction from each side. The people at the health department said, we got a new medical school coming. The health department should be part of it. We want you to find ways to connect us. And Liebelt and Olson just said, well, we say we're a community-based med school, but we're basing that on the fact that we're training in existing community hospitals. He said, there's more to community than that, but we're not sure what it is. So we want somebody to help us do that and to link us with the health department. And they just said, go do it. So I was hired to work full-time, 4 10-hour days at the health department and 1 day a week at the med school.
Yeah, and it was a great decision they made. And I know you remember, I shared your office when you weren't there.
Yes, I certainly do remember that. Of course, first office was in that rental building in Kent.
Right. Martinello, yeah.
Yeah, as
It
yes,
was a warehouse.
we're all there when the cornerstone was laid.
It was a warehouse, and we weren't allowed to hang anything on the wall. The guy didn't
Oh,
want
that's
to ruin
right.
the warehouse.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
That's right. With the empty bookshelves and waste baskets that Jim mentioned. Yeah,
No,
to start with.
Mark, you may not realize this, but you were part of my realization that the school was maturing. And you probably don't remember this, but in 2000, the early 2000s, maybe 2003, I was walking down the street in Bern, Switzerland. I was there to present some work that I had done. And we literally bumped into you. And it turns out you were there presenting at one of your many international presentations. And I thought, wow, the schools really do, look at this man is making.
Mark, do you make a habit of this? Because I bumped into you in southern Germany.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And I have another story, Phil, about Germany. I was in Oberammergau, and
Or I bumped into you. I
yeah,
think.
right. And me and my wife were having breakfast outside, and I picked up this German paper, which I couldn't read. And on the front of it was the picture of Hans Thewissen, who had just discovered the walking whale. So I'm here in Germany reading about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or at
I
least-
remember. Yeah,
At least looking at the pictures, right?
yeah, yes, right, right.
Yeah, we were sitting in a cafe, I remember, and Jan said, "Isn't that Mark Savickas?" So I called out, "Yep, Mark."
Mhm.
You look lost for a few seconds.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I think this is a good place to wrap it up and to say thank you, not just for your time today, but for your service to NEOUCOM and NeoMed. Each of you are distinguished in what you do, and each of you care deeply about our students. And I think that's one of the reasons, there are many, but that's one of the reasons why NEOUCOM and NeoMed is such a special place. I'd like to give each of you kind of a few seconds to just give a final word about the university and your time at the university. And we can start with Dr. Savickas.
Mhm.
The work role can be central to a life. It can be more than work. It can be a focus of friendship, a focus of being part of a larger community. And NEOUCOM, NeoMed to the same day has been a source of many friends, and also the great privilege of working with so many wonderful students. So it's been a privilege to be a part of it. And I'm very fortunate, and my family is fortunate to have been part of it. So thank you to the visionaries who created us.
Dr. Boex?
Pretty tough to follow and act like Mark, but I will say that it has been a tremendous privilege to have come to Rootstown to help build the school. I got an opportunity to learn and to do things I never imagined I would end up doing. It broadened my professional career and opportunities tremendously, being at a brand new medical school, having to do the things as Phil and others have alluded that many of our colleagues coming to an institution would, an existing institution would not have had the chance to do. And as Mark said, it has had a tremendously positive impact on me as a person, on my family, and it continues to this day.
Dr. Westerman?
I just have an enormous sense of gratitude to this institution and to the country, actually, as well, because this was my first academic job, and it was a challenge and a difficult start at the beginning, but things have worked out very well for myself. I've really, the academic world has opened up the world to me in some regards, and it's been an enormous benefit to my family because they've all got their degrees actually from Kent State University. So I have a lot to thank the consortium universities and the medical school. And I've made some lifelong friends here. So I value that deeply.
Dr. Keck?
Well, just echo what my friends here have said. Certainly for me, it allowed me to pursue a career that I was not particularly planning on at the beginning when I moved from medicine to public health and then community health and then academic health departments. So working in the public health world and the academic world at the same time has really given me kind of a unique perspective and given me a unique setting in which to explore how we might get practice and academia working better together for the benefit of our patients, our communities. And of course, all the friendships, all the camaraderie, all of the learning that's gone on is just unbelievable. So it's let me continue working in this way now that I'm an octogenarian, along with the rest of us. It's given me a real opportunity to stay involved, stay useful, and I'm just very thankful.
Wonderful. Gentlemen, thank you again.
Golden Reflections is hosted by Lindsay Loftus and produced by Dave Vitito. Thank you for listening.